In the previous video, we learned about the different lifecycle hooks in Svelte. In this video, we will use the onMount hook to learn how to make a GET request on page load and render the fetched data in our Svelte component. To fetch the data, we need to have an API endpoint. For that, I will be making use of JSON placeholder, as you can see here. It is basically a free-to-use fake online REST API for testing and prototyping. I want the whole focus to be on data fetching in our Svelte application and not on creating an API. JSON placeholder saves us from having to create the API ourselves. I'll leave a link to this site in the description down below. Now if you scroll down to the root section, you can see the possible HTTP requests you can make. For this video, I'll be making a GET request to /posts, which will fetch an array of posts to display in the UI. So let's get started and create a new component within the component folder. Create a new file called postlist.svelte. Let's begin with the script section. We know that we need to fetch a list of posts and render it in the UI. For that, let's declare a new variable called posts and set it to an empty array. So let post is equal to an empty array. Next, let's make the actual API call. The place to make our API call is in the onMount lifecycle hook. So at the top, import onMount from Svelte and then we call the function. onMount accepts a callback function and this callback function is responsible for making the API call. Let's make this async. Within the function, we are going to use the fetch API to make a GET request to the JSON placeholder API. Now to make a GET request, we invoke fetch and pass in the API endpoint assets argument. So const response is equal to await fetch and back in the browser, copy the URL and paste it. Alright, we are now making a GET request. The fetch API returns a promise, which is why we have added the await keyword. This is nothing specific to Svelte and is simply modern JavaScript. Now once the response is retrieved, we need to convert it into a JSON format that we can use in our component. So await response.json and we assign this value to our posts variable. Let's log this post to the console to see the data that we have fetched. If we now include this post list component in our app Svelte and head back to the browser, you should see an array logged in the console. If I expand it, you can see the list of 100 posts that have been retrieved. Each post has an ID, a title and a body property. All that is left now is to render it in the markup. So back in VS Code, we are going to use the each block to render the list of posts. So in the markup section, each post as post and the unique key is going to be post.id. Let's also close the each block. Within the each block, inside an h3 tag, we are going to render post.id followed by post.title. Let's also add a paragraph tag and render the body. Post.body, let's add a horizontal line to separate the different posts. Now save the file, go back to the browser and you should be able to see the list of posts are fetched from the API and displayed in the browser. The blue color of course is from our styles video where we style the h3 tag. Now let me also mention another cool feature about the each block. Between the opening and closing line of the each block, we can add an else block which automatically renders if the data source length is 0. So we can add curly braces, else and a paragraph tag that says loading. Now back in the browser, we can head over to the network tab and set the speed to slow 3G. Refresh and you can see the loading text till the API call completes and the data is fetched. Pretty neat. If you ask me so, this is pretty much how you make an HTTP request in Svelte. Let me explain how this complete process happens as it is really important to understand. When the component initializes, the post variable is set to an empty array and onMount hook is executed at this point. The post array is empty and the markup renders to the loading text. In the background, the fetch API sends an HTTP request to the JSON placeholder. In point, the data is fetched and assigned to the post array. If the component state updates, the component will re-render the post property contain 100 items, which we iterate over using the each block, and in each iteration we bind the post ID, title and the body to the markup, which is then rendered in the browser. So you have successfully used the onMount lifecycle hook for making HTTP requests. In the next video, let's look at another practical usage of the onMount lifecycle hook.